The woman's hand, clad in a thin, sensible glove, recoiled as if from a viper. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue against her pale skin, narrowed, scanning the face of the man standing before her. He was tall, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who commanded attention without uttering a sound. "I beg your pardon?" the man said, his voice a low baritone, smooth as polished river stone, yet carrying an undercurrent of something unreadable. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I assure you, madam, I have no idea what you are referring to." The waitress, whose name was Clara, stood frozen behind the small, round table she had just finished clearing. Her apron was slightly stained from the remnants of a spilled coffee, a stark contrast to the man's pristine appearance. The restaurant was known for its exclusivity, its hushed atmosphere, and its clientele of the city's elite. Clara had served them all, from politicians to movie stars, but she had never encountered anyone quite like this man. He was a regular, always occupying the same corner booth, always ordering the same thing, a black coffee, and the salmon fillet. No sauce. He never spoke more than a few polite words, and his face was a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. "My pocket?" Clara insisted, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a righteous indignation that was beginning to simmer. She gestured vaguely towards the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. "You reached into my apron pocket just now. I felt it." The man's eyebrows rose fractionally. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply continued to meet her gaze, his expression one of mild curiosity. "You are mistaken," he said, his tone unwavering. "I was merely adjusting my jacket. Perhaps a loose thread?" "A loose thread?" Clara almost scoffed. She was a waitress. Her apron pockets were simple, functional things, designed to hold a notepad, a pen, a few napkins. They weren't exactly prime real estate for a man of his stature. Yet, she had felt a distinct pressure, a deliberate insertion of something. It was clumsy, out of character for someone so controlled, but it had happened. "No," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "It wasn't a loose thread. It felt like a small object, something hard." The man tilted his head, his gaze never leaving hers. The restaurant around them hummed with the quiet clatter of silverware and hushed conversations. Other diners, lost in their own worlds, paid no attention. This was a private moment, a strange, unfolding drama playing out between a server and a regular. "A small object," the man repeated, as if tasting the words. He placed his hands flat on the table, his fingers long and elegant. "And you believe I placed it there?" "I don't believe it," Clara stated, her chest tightening. "I know it. I felt your hand." The man let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. He looked around the opulent restaurant, the soft lighting, the white tablecloths, the discreet artwork on the walls. It was a world away from Clara's own life, a life of early mornings, late nights, and the constant scramble to make ends meet. She lived in a small apartment, worked 60 hours a week, and dreamt of a life where she didn't have to count every penny. A life, perhaps, where she could afford a ring like the one she imagined might be small and hard. "Madam," the man said, his tone softening slightly, a calculated move, Clara suspected. "I understand you are performing your duties, but you are mistaken. There is nothing in your pocket." "I would never presume." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "If I may," he continued, reaching for his wallet, "I will leave an additional tip for your trouble. Perhaps that will clear up any misunderstandings." He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and placed it on the table. It was more than Clara made in half a shift. Her instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to refuse it, to demand an explanation for his bizarre behavior. But the sheer amount, the unspoken accusation in his gaze, that she was accusing him out of greed, made her hesitate. Clara looked at the money, then back at the man. His face was impassive. He had already dismissed her, his offer of a tip a polite way of ending an uncomfortable conversation, and, perhaps, an accusation he found beneath him. But Clara couldn't let it go. The feeling of his hand, the distinct shape of something being pressed into her apron, was too real. "Thank you for the tip," Clara said, her voice tight, carefully picking up the bill and placing it in the restaurant's designated tip jar. But it doesn't change what I felt. The man's eyes, which had been drifting away, snapped back to her. There was a flicker of something in them. Annoyance? Surprise? It was impossible to tell. He closed his mouth, the almost smile gone. He looked like a man who was accustomed to being obeyed, to having his statements accepted as fact. Clara's refusal to accept his denial was clearly an aberration. "You are very diligent," the man said, the word chosen with care, sounding almost like a veiled threat. "Perhaps you should check your pocket again." Thoroughly. Clara bristled. Was he trying to make her look foolish? To embarrass her into admitting she was wrong? She reached into her apron pocket, her fingers probing the familiar fabric. There was the notepad, the pen, the crumpled napkin. Nothing else. She pulled her hand out, showing him the contents. "See?" Clara said, her voice sharper now. "Nothing." The man leaned back in the booth, his posture relaxed, yet somehow coiled. He surveyed her with an unnerving intensity. "Indeed," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing. Perhaps you were imagining things. It happens. Long shifts, you know. Stress." Clara felt a flush creep up her neck. He was patronizing her, making her feel small. She wanted to shout, to tell him he was a liar, that she knew what she felt. But the environment, the watchful eyes of the other diners, the knowledge that she was just a waitress and he was him, held her back. "I don't imagine things when it comes to my job," Clara stated, her voice level, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She squared her shoulders. "If that's all, sir?" The man's gaze lingered for a moment longer. Then, with a subtle nod, he turned his attention back to his newspaper, effectively ending the interaction. Clara felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had been dismissed, her concerns brushed aside as the delusions of an overworked employee. But the memory of that brief, intrusive touch, the feeling of something being pressed into her pocket, lingered like a phantom sensation. As Clara walked away, her mind replayed the encounter. Why would he do that? Why reach into her pocket? And what was that small, hard object? Was it a ring? A cufflink? A strange, expensive piece of jewelry? Her imagination, despite the man's insinuation, wasn't running wild. It was trying to make sense of a bizarre, illogical act. She glanced back at the booth. The man was absorbed in his newspaper, a picture of calm detachment. He looked completely unconcerned, as if the entire exchange had been an amusing interlude. But Clara knew better. There was a tension beneath his placid surface, a controlled energy that suggested he was anything but relaxed. Later that evening, after her shift had ended and the restaurant had emptied, Clara found herself replaying the moment in her mind again and again. The man's smooth denial, his condescending offer of a tip, his veiled suggestion that she was imagining things. It all felt too deliberate, too staged. She remembered the exact spot in her apron pocket where she felt the pressure. It was near the stitching, where the fabric was a little thicker. Clara's own hands were rough, her nails short and practical. She wore no jewelry, save for a simple silver chain her grandmother had given her. Rings were a luxury she couldn't afford, a symbol of a different kind of life. As she thought about the man, his wealth, his effortless air of authority, a wild, improbable thought began to take root. What if? What if he had dropped something valuable? Something he didn't want to admit he had lost? And what if, in a moment of panic, he had tried to surreptitiously place it in her pocket, hoping she wouldn't notice until he was gone? But that didn't make sense either. If he was that rich, he wouldn't be fumbling with his pockets in a restaurant. He would have staff, assistants, people to handle such things. Unless it was something he didn't want anyone to know he had. Clara shook her head, trying to dislodge the persistent thought. It was a ridiculous theory. She was an employee, he was a customer. Their interaction was meant to be professional, transactional. Yet, the feeling of his hand, the subtle pressure, wouldn't fade. She went to the staff room and checked her apron again. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling for any snag or tear. Nothing. It was just her plain, sturdy apron. She sighed, pulling it off and hanging it carefully on her locker. As she was about to leave, something caught her eye. A small, dark glint on the floor near where she had been standing, by the booth. It was almost hidden by the shadow cast by a chair leg. Clara knelt down, her heart giving a strange little leap. It was a small, intricately engraved metal object. She picked it up. It was a cufflink. But not just any cufflink. This was heavy, made of a dark, polished metal, possibly platinum, with an intricate, almost microscopic engraving of a crest on its surface. It looked incredibly expensive. This had to be what she felt. This was what he had tried to slip into her pocket. Clara's mind raced. Why would he try to hide this? Why not just ask her to look for it? She looked at the cufflink, turning it over in her fingers. The crest was unfamiliar, elegant, and old-fashioned. She knew immediately this was not something that belonged to an ordinary man. This was something from a world far removed from her own. She remembered the man's face, his carefully controlled demeanor. He had denied everything, accused her of imagining things. He had even offered her money to smooth things over. He clearly didn't want her to have found this, but now she had. Clara felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just about a lost item. This felt like something more. There was a secrecy about it, a deliberate attempt to conceal. She thought about the way he had looked at her, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't just a rich man. He was a man with something to hide. She slipped the cufflink into her own pocket, a sudden, impulsive decision. She knew she should probably hand it in to the manager, report it. But a part of her, a part that had always felt overlooked and underestimated, wanted to understand. She wanted to know why. Why the stealth? Why the denial? As Clara walked out of the restaurant that night, the cold night air felt sharp against her face. The city lights blurred around her, but her focus was sharp. In her pocket, the weight of the cufflink felt significant, a tangible piece of a puzzle she had stumbled into. This wasn't just a story about a waitress and a wealthy customer anymore. It was a mystery, and Clara, the observant waitress, had just found the first clue. She had no idea where this would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, just like the man's carefully constructed facade, was about to become a lot more complicated. The encounter, which had begun with a simple, seemingly innocuous action, had ignited a spark of curiosity that Clara couldn't ignore. The weight of the cufflink in her pocket was a constant reminder of the man's peculiar behavior and the unanswered questions that swirled around him. It was a stark contrast to the mundane routine of her daily life, and it promised an adventure, however small, that she hadn't anticipated. The city, which had always seemed a backdrop to her struggles, now felt like a stage for something potentially extraordinary. She clutched the cufflink in her pocket, a silent promise to herself that she would unravel this enigma, no matter how long it took or where it led her. It was a risky proposition, stepping into the world of the wealthy and secretive, but the allure of the unknown, coupled with the injustice she felt from his dismissive attitude, propelled her forward. She was no longer just Clara the waitress. She was Clara the investigator, armed with a single, enigmatic clue. The night was young, and the mystery had just begun. She walked faster, the rhythm of her steps quickening with the beat of her own racing heart. The city's pulse seemed to echo her own, a symphony of the unexpected. The cufflink, a small object, held the promise of a large story, a narrative that Clara was now inextricably a part of. She wondered if the man would even realize it was missing, or if he had deliberately left it behind, a test of sorts. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of apprehension and excitement. This was a game she hadn't signed up for, but one she was now determined to play. The weight in her pocket was a constant, tangible reminder of the encounter, a seed of intrigue that had been planted and was now beginning to sprout. She envisioned the man's reaction when he discovered the cufflink was gone, the potential confusion, the anger, or perhaps the quiet satisfaction, if this was all part of his plan. The possibilities were endless, and Clara found herself drawn into the labyrinth of his intentions. The allure of the unknown was a powerful force, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond the four walls. She looked up at the sky, a vast expanse of darkness punctuated by distant stars, and felt a sense of possibility, a whisper of destiny. This was more than just a found object. It was the beginning of something significant, a deviation from the predictable path of her life. The weight in her pocket was not just metal. It was the key to unlocking a secret that might just change everything. The man had underestimated her, and that, Clara knew, was his first mistake. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the motivation was clear: uncover the truth behind the mysterious cufflink and the even more mysterious man who wore it. The city lights seemed to beckon her, a promise of answers hidden within its intricate tapestry of streets and stories. The encounter had been brief, but its impact was profound, a ripple that had spread through Clara's ordinary existence, transforming it into something unexpected and potentially life-altering. She quickened her pace, the resolve in her stride unwavering. The mystery had begun, and Clara was ready to delve in. The night air was cool, but a fire had been lit within her, fueled by curiosity and a sense of burgeoning adventure. The cufflink was her tangible link to a world of secrets, and she was determined to follow it wherever it led. This was no longer just about a found item. It was about uncovering the story behind the man, his actions, and the hidden meaning of the ornate crest etched into the metal. The weight in her pocket was a constant reminder that her life had taken an unexpected turn, and she was embracing it with open arms, ready for whatever lay ahead. The night held its breath, and Clara stepped into its embrace, ready for the unfolding drama. The journey had commenced, not with a bang, but with a subtle, deliberate act in a quiet restaurant booth, an act that had set in motion a chain of events Clara was now poised to explore. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a participant in a story far grander than any she had ever imagined, a story that began with a found cufflink and a billionaire's secretive touch. The night was filled with possibilities, and Clara was ready to embrace them all, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The weight in her pocket was a promise, a whisper of secrets waiting to be revealed, and she was eager to listen. The next day, Clara arrived at work with a determined glint in her eyes. She slipped the cufflink into her apron pocket, its cool metal a constant reminder of the previous night's strange encounter. She scanned the familiar faces of her colleagues, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. Today, the man would likely return. She needed to be ready. The restaurant buzzed with its usual morning energy, but for Clara, the air was thick with anticipation. She checked the man's usual booth. It was empty. A flicker of disappointment, mixed with relief, washed over her. He wasn't here yet, but she knew, with a certainty that unsettled her, that he would come. Her mind replayed his words, his dismissive tone, his offer of money. It was a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it. The cufflink felt heavy, a symbol of secrets and unanswered questions. She wondered what his reaction would be if he knew she had it. Would he be angry, frightened, or would he be amused by her tenacity? The possibilities were endless, and Clara braced herself for whatever the day might bring. She smoothed down her apron, a small gesture of preparation. The weight in her pocket was a constant reassurance, a tangible link to the mystery. She knew this was more than just a lost item. It was an invitation, a challenge, and Clara, for the first time in a long time, felt ready to accept it. The morning light streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The scent of brewing coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the air, a comforting aroma that usually soothed Clara's nerves. But today, it did little to calm the thrum of anticipation that coursed through her veins. She adjusted a table setting, her movements automatic, her mind miles away. The man's face, his unreadable expression, flashed behind her eyes. She remembered the feeling of his hand, the subtle, deliberate pressure against her apron. It was a sensation that refused to fade, a ghostly echo of an unsettling intimacy. She wondered about the crest on the cufflink, the intricate design that spoke of lineage and status. It was a symbol of a world so different from her own, a world of inherited privilege and power. And yet, here she was, holding a piece of that world in her pocket. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, playing a game with rules she didn't understand. But the desire to uncover the truth, to understand the man's motives, was too strong to ignore. She glanced towards the door, half expecting him to walk in at any moment. A part of her hoped he wouldn't, that the mystery would remain unsolved. A fleeting, strange encounter. But another, more insistent part of her yearned for answers. She wanted to confront him, to see his reaction, to witness the mask slip, if only for a moment. The cufflink was her leverage, her secret weapon. She felt a surge of empowerment, a feeling she rarely experienced in her daily life. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an observer, a holder of secrets, a player in a game she was only beginning to comprehend. The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks, each one punctuated by stolen glances at the door and the lingering weight of the cufflink in her pocket. The quiet hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware seemed to fade into the background as Clara's focus narrowed, her senses on high alert. She served patrons with a practiced smile, her mind racing, piecing together fragments of the previous night's encounter. The man's reserved demeanor, the subtle tension in his posture, the almost imperceptible shift in his eyes when she had challenged him. It all pointed to something more than a simple case of a dropped accessory. There was a story here, a narrative woven with threads of secrecy and perhaps even deception. Clara felt a growing sense of responsibility, a need to understand the truth behind the man's actions. The cufflink was not just a lost item. It was a key, and she was determined to use it to unlock the secrets it held. The hours stretched on, each minute a step closer to a potential confrontation or perhaps a deeper understanding. The restaurant, usually a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a stage set for an unfolding drama, and Clara was its unwitting protagonist. The weight of the cufflink in her pocket was a constant, tangible reminder of the mystery, and she held onto it with a mix of trepidation and a burgeoning sense of purpose. She knew that whatever happened next, her life had taken an unexpected turn, and she was ready to face it head-on. The anticipation was a palpable force, shaping her every thought and action. She was a waitress with a secret, a keeper of a billionaire's lost treasure, and the story was just beginning. The man's absence was a puzzle in itself. Did he know she had it? Was he waiting for her to approach him? Or had he simply forgotten about it, a trivial loss in his opulent world? Clara dismissed the last thought. His behavior the previous night suggested otherwise. There was a deliberate nature to his actions, a calculated attempt to retrieve or conceal whatever he had lost. The cufflink was proof of that. It was a silent testament to his clandestine efforts. As she polished a glass, the reflection showed a determined young woman, her eyes sharp with a newfound purpose. The restaurant had always been her world, a place of routine and predictability. But today, it felt like the threshold of something entirely new, a gateway to a hidden realm of secrets and intrigue. The weight in her pocket was a constant, reassuring presence, a reminder of the power she now held. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant, a holder of a crucial piece of the puzzle. The day unfolded with a measured pace, each passing moment amplifying Clara's anticipation. She served coffee, cleared tables, and maintained the facade of normalcy, all while her mind was consumed by the mystery of the cufflink and the man who owned it. His absence from his usual booth only intensified her curiosity. Was he avoiding her, or was he orchestrating events from afar? The possibilities were endless, and Clara found herself drawn deeper into the intricate web of intrigue. The cufflink, nestled securely in her apron pocket, felt like a tangible link to a hidden world, a world of wealth, power, and secrets. She knew that her life had taken an unexpected turn, and she was ready to embrace the adventure, whatever the cost. The day was a canvas of anticipation, and Clara was the artist, ready to paint her own destiny onto it, one brushstroke at a time. The restaurant, with its quiet elegance, now seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the return of its enigmatic patron and the resolution of the mystery that had begun with a subtle touch and a lost cufflink. Clara, the observant waitress, was at the center of it all, a quiet force ready to unravel the truth, one step at a time. The weight in her pocket was a constant reminder of her unique position, a silent promise of discovery. The door to the restaurant chimed softly, and Clara's head snapped up. It was him, the billionaire, his presence filling the room with an almost palpable aura of wealth and authority, strode towards his usual booth. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the restaurant's hushed murmur. She watched him settle in, his movements economical and precise, like a predator perfectly at ease in its domain. He ordered his usual black coffee, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the air. Clara took a deep breath, the cufflink a cool, heavy presence in her apron pocket. This was it, the moment of truth. She approached his table, her tray laden with his coffee and a fresh napkin. Her hands felt clammy, but she forced a professional smile. "Your coffee, sir," Clara said, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning within her. The man looked up, his gaze sharp and direct. It scanned her face, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Clara felt a prickle of unease. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Or perhaps, he was just incredibly perceptive. His expression was unreadable, a mask of polite indifference that offered no clues. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and even. He didn't smile. He just watched her, his eyes like chips of ice. Analyzing, assessing. Clara could feel her resolve wavering under his intense scrutiny. She wanted to blurt it all out, to accuse him, to demand an explanation. But something held her back. The ingrained professionalism, the fear of making a scene, and perhaps a lingering doubt about what she was truly up against. She turned to leave, her steps faltering slightly. Then, an impulse, sudden and irresistible, seized her. She stopped, turned back, and met his gaze directly. "Sir," Clara began, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying an unusual weight. "I believe you may have dropped something yesterday." The man's composure, so carefully maintained, fractured for a fleeting instant. A subtle clench of his jaw, a flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression that revealed more than his words ever could. He didn't respond immediately, his silence stretching, taut and expectant. Clara held her breath, waiting. The anticipation was almost unbearable, each second ticking by like an eternity. He was studying her, she knew, trying to gauge her intentions, her knowledge. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before, almost a murmur. "Did I?" he asked, his tone, carefully neutral, but with an underlying current of something else. Curiosity, or perhaps a veiled warning. Clara felt a strange surge of adrenaline. She had caught him off guard. She had seen the mask slip. "Yes, sir," Clara confirmed, her voice gaining a touch more confidence. "A cufflink. It has a crest on it." She paused, letting the words sink in. She didn't mention she had it. Not yet. She wanted to see his reaction, to gauge how important this lost item truly was to him. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle tightening of his features. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "A cufflink," he repeated, as if the word itself held some significance. "And you believe it belongs to me?" "I believe you might have lost it here yesterday," Clara stated, choosing her words with extreme care. She was treading on dangerous ground, but the thrill of the unknown, the desire to unravel the mystery, spurred her on. She watched his face, searching for any hint of recognition, any sign that her accusation, however veiled, had struck home. The man remained still, his expression a carefully constructed facade. He was a master of control, and Clara knew she had to be equally deliberate. The cufflink in her pocket felt like a ticking time bomb, a secret waiting to be detonated. This encounter was far more complex than she had anticipated, and she realized she was playing a game with very high stakes. The billionaire's controlled demeanor hinted at a depth of secrets, and Clara felt a growing certainty that she was on the cusp of uncovering something significant. The weight of the cufflink was a constant reminder of the precariousness of her position, and yet, it also fueled her determination to see this through. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a detective, piecing together clues in a world she barely understood, and the billionaire was her prime suspect. The game had begun, and Clara was determined to win. The quiet hum of the restaurant faded into the background as the tension between Clara and the billionaire intensified. Each word spoken, each glance exchanged, was loaded with unspoken meaning. The encounter was no longer about a simple lost item. It was a silent battle of wills, a delicate dance between revelation and concealment. Clara could sense that she had stumbled upon something far more significant than a mere accident, and the billionaire's carefully crafted composure was a testament to the hidden depths of his world. The weight of the cufflink in her pocket was a constant, tangible reminder of the mystery, and Clara felt a growing sense of resolve. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the personal risk. The encounter had transcended the ordinary, and Clara knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The billionaire's enigmatic presence, coupled with the mystery of the cufflink, had opened a door to a world of intrigue, and Clara was stepping through it, ready to face whatever lay beyond. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration as she realized she was no longer just an observer, but an active participant in an unfolding drama. The billionaire's calculated response confirmed her suspicions. This was no ordinary lost item. It was something he desperately wanted to keep hidden, and Clara, with her sharp eyes and quiet determination, had inadvertently become the keeper of his secret. The weight in her pocket felt like a tangible burden, a responsibility she hadn't asked for but was now compelled to carry. The encounter was a turning point, and Clara knew she couldn't go back to her old life, not after this. The restaurant, once a symbol of her mundane existence, had transformed into the stage for an extraordinary encounter, a meeting that had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter her path. The billionaire's unreadable expression was a challenge, a dare, and Clara accepted it, her resolve hardening with each passing moment. The game had truly begun. The billionaire's gaze intensified, a silent challenge passed between them. Clara, her heart pounding, met his stare, her own resolve solidifying. She had the cufflink. She knew he wanted it back, and she knew he was hiding something. "I have it," Clara said, her voice surprisingly firm, the words cutting through the restaurant's quiet hum. She slowly reached into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. She pulled out the cufflink, the intricate crest glinting under the soft lights. The man's eyes, previously glacial, flickered with something akin to surprise, quickly masked by a practiced impassivity. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the object in her hand. "So, you did," he said, his voice a low murmur. He extended his hand, palm up. "If you would be so kind." Clara hesitated. This was the moment. The moment she handed over the proof, the key to his secret, and likely, the end of this strange, intoxicating encounter. But a powerful curiosity, an unshakable need to understand why, held her back. "Why was it so important for you to get this back without anyone knowing?" Clara asked, her voice a quiet challenge. "Why the secrecy? What are you hiding?" The billionaire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he met her gaze, his eyes probing, searching. "Some things," he said, his voice measured, "are best left undisturbed, for everyone's sake." "Whose sake?" Clara pressed, her voice unwavering. "Yours? Or the sake of whatever secret this cufflink represents?" She turned the cufflink over in her fingers, examining the crest again. It was detailed, complex, speaking of history and lineage. "This isn't just a piece of jewelry, is it?" A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the man's lips. It was the first genuine smile Clara had seen, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges. It held a hint of amusement but also a touch of weariness. "No, it is not," he admitted. He looked at the cufflink, then back at Clara, his gaze holding a newfound respect. "You are more observant than most, Clara, and perhaps more courageous, or more foolish." Clara replied, a wry smile playing on her lips. "I don't know what you're involved in, but it feels significant." "It is," the man confirmed, his tone serious again. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a card. It was thick, embossed with gold lettering. "This is my private contact information. If you are truly determined to understand, if you are willing to accept certain risks, then you may contact me. I can offer you an explanation, and perhaps a proposition." Clara took the card. It felt heavy, substantial, much like the cufflink, much like the secret it represented. The offer hung in the air, a tempting, dangerous invitation. The restaurant, with its comfortable familiarity, suddenly felt like a cage. The life she knew, the routine, the predictable rhythm of her days, seemed to shrink in significance. "A proposition?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "An opportunity," the billionaire corrected, his eyes holding hers, "to see beyond the everyday, to understand that some secrets, while dangerous, are also illuminating. The choice, however, is entirely yours. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. Think carefully, Clara. The path you are considering is not an easy one. He placed a significant amount of cash on the table, far more than his usual tip, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the city's evening throng as silently as he had arrived. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the card in one hand, the cufflink in the other. The encounter had been brief, intense, and utterly life-altering. She looked down at the cufflink, its intricate crest a symbol of a world she had only glimpsed. Then she looked at the card, the stark gold lettering promising answers, explanations, and a future she couldn't yet comprehend. The weight in her pocket was no longer just a cufflink, it was the weight of a decision, a crossroads. She could return to her life, forget this encounter, and the man who had so briefly disrupted her world. Or she could step onto a path shrouded in mystery, a path paved with secrets and the promise of understanding. The encounter had revealed a man who was not simply wealthy, but complex, a man with a hidden depth that Clara found both terrifying and irresistible. He had offered her a glimpse behind the curtain, a peek into a world where secrets held immense power. Clara walked out of the restaurant that night, the city lights blurring around her. The card felt warm in her hand, a tangible connection to the enigma. She knew this wasn't the end of the story, but a beginning. The billionaire had underestimated her, thinking she would simply return the cufflink and forget. But he hadn't accounted for Clara's quiet determination, her innate sense of justice, and her insatiable curiosity. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was Clara, the keeper of a secret, the holder of a key, standing at the precipice of an unknown future. The choice was hers, and as she hailed a cab, the resolve in her eyes was clear. The mystery had drawn her in, and she was ready to follow it to its conclusion, no matter where it led. The weight of the cufflink was now balanced by the weight of the decision she was about to make, a decision that would irrevocably change the course of her life. She clutched the card, the embossed lettering a promise of answers. She knew the risks, the dangers that might accompany such a path, but the allure of the unknown, the promise of unraveling a profound secret, was too powerful to resist. This was more than just a story. It was an invitation to step into a world of intrigue, a world far removed from the predictable rhythm of her previous existence. The billionaire's offer was a gamble, but Clara was ready to play. She stepped into the cab, the city lights a blur of possibility, her heart alight with a sense of purpose. The journey had truly begun. The encounter had been a catalyst, transforming her from a passive observer into an active participant in a narrative far grander than she could have ever imagined. The cufflink, once a mere trinket, now represented a pivotal moment, a turning point that had set her on a path of discovery. She knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was armed with her own quiet strength and an unyielding thirst for truth. The billionaire had opened a door, and Clara, the observant waitress, was ready to walk through it, ready to unravel the profound secrets that lay beyond the gilded facade. The city was a labyrinth of possibilities, and she was ready to explore its hidden depths, one step at a time. The encounter had been a spark, igniting a fire within her, a desire to understand the complexities of the human heart and the hidden machinations of power. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but the prospect of uncovering the truth was a reward in itself. The weight of the cufflink was a constant reminder of her unique position, and the card was a key, promising access to a world of knowledge. Clara was ready to embrace the adventure, to step out of the shadows and into the light of understanding. The night was hers, and she was ready to seize it, ready to unravel the enigma that had begun with a subtle touch and a lost cufflink. The story was far from over. It was only just beginning. She looked at the card one last time, a symbol of the unknown and a promise of the extraordinary. Clara knew that her life would never be the same. The encounter with the billionaire had been a fateful collision of worlds, and she was ready to embrace the consequences, ready to discover the truth, and ready to redefine her own destiny. The city pulsed around her, a symphony of the unknown, and Clara was ready to conduct her own melody, a melody of courage, curiosity, and unwavering determination. The weight in her pocket was no longer just a cufflink. It was the embodiment of her newfound power, the power to seek truth and to shape her own future. The night was an open book, and Clara was ready to write her own chapter, a chapter filled with suspense, revelation, and the extraordinary. The billionaire had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would lead her down a path she never expected, a path of discovery and transformation. And as the taxi sped through the city streets, Clara knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The mystery had taken root, and she was ready to nurture it, to watch it bloom into a truth that would redefine everything she thought she knew. The encounter had been a single, pivotal moment, but its ripple effect would be profound, setting Clara on a course that promised both peril and unparalleled revelation. The weight of the cufflink, the feel of the card in her hand, all served as tangible reminders of the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She was no longer just a bystander. She was an active participant, ready to confront the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of wealth and power. The night was young, and Clara was ready to embrace the unfolding drama, her spirit ignited by the prospect of uncovering a truth that promised to be as profound as it was perilous. The billionaire had offered her a choice, and Clara had chosen the path less traveled, the path of the unknown, the path that led to understanding.